Hello, everybody. This is Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and organize around the eco-socialist program that I ran on with Angela Walker. And I'm speaking kind of in a library tone because I'm in an independent bookstore right now in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Been helping the Green Party of Pennsylvania wrap up their petition drive. They got to turn in petitions Monday. So I went out there in the hot sun. It's nearly 90. I'm still sweating. Got my, it was a gay pride fest. So I had this green rainbow party from Massachusetts. I hadn't worn this hat before, but the rainbow seemed appropriate. So keep the sun out of my face. And before I get into comments, I just wanted to introduce you to Jubilin Williams, who's been out there petitioning with me. She's from Harrisburg. And so, how did it go today?
Yes, I'm Jubilin X. Williams. I also ran for the Harrisburg City School Board in 2021. And this is the first time I've petitioned at a gay pride festival. It went very well. Previously, I've gone door to door during lockdown, and I've also done the farmers market in recent weeks. But this, I believe, was the easiest to gather petitions at the festival. It's the Gay Pride Festival. So I'm glad that I did this. I work overnights, so I was off this morning. This is my Friday, actually, and it's actually like the middle of the night for me right now, but I still have a little juice left in me just because it was the middle of the day, it was sunny, it was hot, and the vibe was there.
Yeah, I only had one day as good as this in New York in our petition drive. That was an abortion rights march that the Planned Parenthood and a coalition put together. And, pretty much everybody there signed. Same here. About the only people that didn't sign looked like Democratic Party, quote unquote, allies of the LGBT movement. And of course, they had qualms, oh, you're taking our votes. And I had to tell them, you don't own our votes. But, most of the, LGBT people said, of course. We want the Greens on there. They know that we've, been on the cutting edge of this, and the Democrats have been dragged along. So, was that pretty much your experience?
It was. I've actually had at least 5 people say that we need to do away with the two-party system, and we need more choice. We need more options. So, and I was sharing with them in the parliamentarian system, you usually form coalitions between multiple parties so that you can be more representative, or the electorate, I think it is more representative of the people they serve. I'm not sure if I got the vocab.
The legislatures,
correct.
Legislatures, every party gets support in proportion to the support and the vote it has.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a multi-party open democracy instead of what we got in this country. A closed two-party system where, I kept telling those Democrats, I said, oh, you're stealing our votes. I said, look, we got a solution to this spoiler problem, and that's ranked choice voting and proportional representation. And the damn Democrats, instead of embracing that, they do all kinds of dirty tricks to keep us off the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
And, in any other advanced democracy, this is not an issue.
Mm-hmm.
You want to run as an independent for the House of Commons in England, 10 signatures. You want to do it in states like Pennsylvania, New York, it's thousands of signatures.
Mm-hmm.
And then people wonder why they don't have more choices.
Mm-hmm.
So most people here, they were ready to sign.
Mm-hmm. And I was speaking to someone who was working on behalf of the Organization of Cooperative European States or something like that during the 2021 election. He was from Switzerland, and he asked my experience with voting and voter suppression, if you will. And I showed him a Washington Post article that I was quoted in, committing to Howie Hawkins for the campaign. I was very energized by his campaign just because he's so smart and he has a command of multiple issues, whether it's domestic or foreign policy, and also energy, as well as social and racial issues. So I was very excited about his nomination, and he reviewed the comments and said, I don't know what his notes concluded, but it went into a report for the Organization of Cooperative. I'm not
OECD.
sure. There you go.
Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development.
There you go. He was one of 2 representatives in Harrisburg, but he could not get access to the polls because of some state law. So
Well, that organization is an intergovernmental organization, came out of the Helsinki Accords. And originally it was worried about human rights in the Soviet bloc. But since the fall of the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc, they focus more attention on the United States than any other country because our electoral system is so repressive. And they keep coming out with reports. You know, there's not fair ballot access, the winner-take-all plurality voting system with single-member districts creates a two-party system that systematically excludes all other viewpoints. And they keep issuing reports. I mean, the United States is one of the least democratic among the countries in this Helsinki Accords. And so, yeah, it's interesting that you got to meet one of them. They do try to come and observe our elections, and what they report is not very good.
Okay. And he was one of two in Harrisburg in 2020. So I think they were both from, I'm not sure where the woman was from. I don't remember now, but yeah, he's from Switzerland. He says he's also a member of the equivalent of the Green Party there, and it takes about 20 signatures. I could be wrong. I might be, I don't remember exactly, but it was a minuscule amount compared to what we have to get in Pennsylvania, which for the statewide positions or offices, it's 5,000 votes, at least this cycle.
Yeah, which is a lot better than it used to be in Pennsylvania. But still, compared to other countries, pretty ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, in other countries, it's just a modest indication of support. And they don't have overcrowded ballots. You know, usually have 4, 5, or 6 serious parties and maybe occasionally an independent candidate. You know, people can handle that when they go to the polls and make their choices. So yeah, we got a long way to go, but hopefully we can advance on these issues. And that's why we need the Green Party, because the Democrats, like I said earlier, instead of embracing these reforms, which would solve the problems they worry about, they just try to suppress the Green Party.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a fascistic response, you know, suppressing the political party. That's what fascist governments do. And not that the Democrats are as bad as the Republicans, but they're still bad. Let's leave it at that. Okay, well, you gonna get some food or drink?
Yes.
Yeah, somebody asked me about hydrating. Yeah, I've been through 2 of these and I'm almost out of this one. So it's been hot out there. So, okay, let me say a few words about, I think, you know, the environmental movement doesn't know, it calls defeats victories. And that's, I think, what we're seeing with this so-called Manchik climate bill, which most of the environmental movement, except the more principled groups, is, you know, just jumping up and down. And according to the bill's summary, we cut 40% of carbon emissions by 2030. And there's a model out there, but that assumes a lot of action by private industry and states. It's just not on the drawing board. So that's a lot of hot air. And it's, of course, a retreat from what Biden promised with Build Back Better, which was a 50% cut, which also relied on the same model by the Rhodium Group that assumed a lot of action by states and private industry that you just can't count on. So that top line number is very specious. And the main thing in this bill that concerns me is in order for there to be wind and solar projects on public lands, there first has to be the leasing of oil and gas leases on the same amount of lands. And it requires the Interior Department to offer at least 2 million acres of public land and 60 million acres of water offshore for oil and gas leasing each year for the next 10 years before they will permit any utility scale renewable energy projects on public lands or waters. That's 600 million acres offshore, which is 4 times the entire size of the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, are you kidding me? This is just a license for oil and gas to go out and drill all they want. And it locks the government into permitting these new oil and gas leases for the next decade. So anytime the federal government, Interior Department wants to set up offshore wind or solar rights on federal land, the bill mandates that it has to hold oil and gas leases first. Now, International Energy Agency, which is an intergovernmental agency formed during the energy crisis in the early 70s, had a report earlier this year in May saying that no fossil fuel project should be started in the world if we're going to stay below a rise of 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this bill just totally contradicts that. So this bill basically ensures that the fossil industry will maintain current oil and gas production levels without any change for the next decade. And you call this a climate bill? I mean, give me a break. It subsidizes nuclear power plants that want to close for economic reasons. It keeps them open. It's more expensive than building renewables for the same amount of energy, not to mention the danger of keeping embrittled nuclear power plants embrittled by radiation, meaning they're more prone to accidents running. It subsidizes carbon capture facilities, which haven't worked. They want to pay $85 a metric ton. How about a carbon tax of $85 a ton? Instead of paying them to capture it, pay them or make them pay for polluting. That's what a carbon tax would do. In New York, we have the Greens are supporting a bill that would start the carbon tax at $35 a ton and escalate it by $15 a year for 10 years to $185. That would begin to create real incentives to move off fossil fuels. Now, the bill also would pay any company that did carbon removal, and that's direct air capture, and then sequester underground, up to $180 per metric ton. So that's a lot. It's a lot more than they'll pay for just capturing it. Problem is there are no successful working examples of any of this except what they've done in Iceland, where they mix carbonated water with and put it into basalt rock formations. And that carbonated water, the carbon solidifies into carbonates in the porous basaltic rock. So that carbon is geologically sequestered. And that's something we got to do. And it's something the public is going to have to pay for, I believe, because there's no way to make money off of that. But that's how we're going to draw carbon out of the atmosphere. In terms of the subsidies for renewables, there's $30 billion in it for companies to build solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, and to process critical minerals in the United States. So that's out of a $369 billion bill, which is less than 10% is subsidies for those renewables. Plus, you have to wonder about the subsidies without conditions like prevailing wage and unionization, because one of the problems we're having getting the labor movement on board with this is that the jobs in building solar panels, installing turbines, and retrofitting buildings is that they're paying rock bottom wages. And so, labor wants some kind of, want to make sure they're good jobs, and we do too. So, but that's not in this bill. There's no money for long distance transmission lines, which is really the limiting factor now for utility scale wind and solar projects. Which means, many of these projects that companies might want to build are not going to be built because they can't get the electricity in the market because of the lack of long distance transmission lines. So like, the Southwest is a lot of sun, but they don't have the transmission lines to get it to the West Coast or the Midwest. Same with offshore wind. So that's a big missing piece in a so-called climate bill. But there's a side deal. It can't be put in this bill because it's not part of reconciliation, which is what this is, which it has to be about the budget. But they're going to, Pelosi and Schumer promised to pass a bill to basically bypass all the regulations on permitting pipelines. That means, for example, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which goes through West Virginia. They're going to frack the hell out of West Virginia and Ohio and ship that down to the Atlantic Ocean. And then a lot of that's going to be made into liquefied natural gas and shipped overseas. So it's a big carbon project. And then there are these CO2 pipelines in the Midwest where they're talking about, carbon capture and sequestration. But what they're actually doing is shipping that up to the Bakken area where they fracked for oil. And then they push the carbon dioxide into the frack wells to get more oil out. So it doesn't really capture the carbon. I mean, there's all kinds of boondoggles in this thing. Now, there are tax credits for consumers for electric vehicles, heat pumps, and solar panels, $80 billion in total. But the problem is most of these are refundable. Or they're not refundable. They're deductible. If they were refundable, you'd get paid. You only get paid if you have enough of a tax liability that you can deduct these credits. So it's really only for the upscale people. The low and middle income people are not going to be able to take advantage of these things. Now, the one they will be able to take care of or advantage of is credits for electric vehicles, $4,000 for a used electric vehicle, $7,500 for a new EV. But low and middle income people aren't paying, $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 for one of the low end electric vehicles, which is what they're priced at right now. So this is really, again, aimed for the upscale market, not the masses of people. And then there are a bunch of tax credits for clean energy to the companies. I don't want to bore you with a lot of the details, but I will say that there's a credit for so-called clean hydrogen production, with the level of credit depending on the life cycle of greenhouse gas emissions associated with that hydrogen fuel, which means it's going to subsidize black hydrogen, gray hydrogen, blue hydrogen, hydrogens that are fossil fuel sourced, instead of only subsidizing green hydrogen, which is water sourced and doesn't release carbon. So they're basically subsidizing the fossil fuel industry again. And actually, the American Petroleum Institute called for that so-called clean hydrogen tax credit, which isn't clean. I don't want to go into all the details. There's so-called $60 billion for environmental justice programs, but I think that's a ruse, because a lot of it's block grants that goes to state and local government. Disadvantaged communities don't control their state and local governments. Got a lot of money for environmental justice mapping to identify disadvantaged communities as if we don't know where they are. That's a lot of money for a bunch of academics and nonprofits. $27 billion to create a national climate bank that supposedly prioritize the disadvantaged communities. But why are we making them borrow money instead of just granting them the money is to help clean up the mess that has been imposed upon them? So that's the environmental stuff. There's other things in there. $64 billion more in subsidies for the American, the ACA or Obamacare insurance exchanges. That goes to private insurance companies. It's not, Medicare for all, not a public system. The drug price reforms, there's some good stuff in there. They are going to negotiate, Medicare is going to negotiate, but they're limited to 10 drugs, starting in 2026 and going up to 20 drugs in 2029. And it doesn't include insulin. So, if you're going to negotiate all of them. Why is it limited? Because they're in debt to Big Pharma, and Big Pharma is going to fight this. So probably the best thing is they have a cap on seniors out-of-pocket drug costs at $2,000 per year. But then, seniors got to keep their bills and then deduct. And again, they may be in a situation where they're paying $3,500 for drugs, and they deduct that, but they're the general deduction you get will be bigger, so they won't be able to take advantage of that. And then there's some tax reforms. They are going to tax the rich, 15% corporate minimum tax. That's good, better than what we got. Originally, I think it was Yellen was talking about making that 23% or 25%. That got bargained down. There's a lot of talk about the carried interest loophole, which is basically the way these trust fund partners, or not trust fund, hedge fund and private equity partners, they take money that's capital gains, they take money that's income and they treat it as capital gains. So it gets taxed at 20% instead of 37%. And they tweaked it by saying you have to, if you don't hold on to an investment for 5 years, the old time was 3 years, you're going to have to pay the income tax. But the average, these hedge funds and whatnot, they hold their investments on average more than 5 years. So it's not going to make a big difference. So that's your climate bill. And, there are some things for renewables, but, when I balance it out, I would vote against it. You just don't want to build fossil fuel infrastructure that's going to be with us for decades. Not at this stage of the game. So I think it's better to stop those than to get some incentives for renewables, which are, going to move forward anyway without public support. Not as fast, but it's not like that industry is going to die. It really does need a lot of public support, particularly infrastructure, like I mentioned, the high transmission lines. So that's where we're at. And, a lot of the environmental groups, except a few like Food and Water Watch and the Center for Biological Diversity or Integrity, they've come out against it. But, most of the big enviros have been for it, the Bill McKibbins and the Sierra Clubs. And like I said, I see this as a defeat, and they're calling it a victory. And when we do that, we're getting defeated. The other thing that happened this week, I just want to mention briefly, is they passed a huge corporate welfare bill for the microchip manufacturing industry, $77 billion. And these are the semiconductor companies that are making tens of billions of dollars a year. And 5 of these companies are going to receive most of this. Intel, Texas Instruments, Micron Technology, Global Foundries, and Samsung. They made $70 billion in profits last year. And we're going to hand them $77 billion more. These are the companies that shipped our microchip industry abroad over the last 20 years. 780 manufacturing plants shut down. 150,000 jobs here in the United States lost. And they did it while receiving $9.5 billion in government subsidies and loans. We basically paid them to move overseas. And now we're going to give them $77 billion. Just take Intel. They made $20 billion in profits last year. And they spent $16 billion in stock buybacks. And it's estimated from this bill, Intel's going to receive between 20 and 30 billion in this corporate welfare, no strings attached. So what's to stop them from doing stock buybacks or continuing to manufacture chips overseas? It's just a giveaway. These politicians are paying their paymasters back for the campaign contributions. So this is a whole argument for public ownership and workers' control, instead of being blackmailed to get them to produce domestically by giving them ransom. We should own the industry. We're not going to ship our own jobs overseas. Make it accountable to the community and the workers that work there. So that would be part of an eco-socialist solution. So I'll stop there and look forward to your questions. Jordan Rodriguez. Howie, I'm in school for environmental policy and just finished an internship with Western Resource Advocates. Any advice on what I can be doing now to further environmental justice while I'm in school? Well, be part of the organization, preferably a Green Party local. I don't care if it's the Sunshine Movement, which sort of gave backhanded support to this Manchin bill. The point is they're meeting and talking and being active, and it's important to be part of a collective activity rather than just doing stuff online by yourself. So that would be the first thing, be involved in an organization. And then, a lot of this training for environmental jobs is training for corporate environmental jobs to basically help corporations deal with, avoid, lobby against environmental regulations. So I hope, you keep your eye out on that. The nonprofit sector is where the advocates for environmental, regulations, mandates, and so forth are. And of course, there you got the problem that those nonprofits have an interest in self-perpetuation. So like I was kind of making fun of the environmental justice provisions. I've seen that so often. A lot of that money goes to, upper middle class credentialed people who are paid to work on behalf of people who don't even know they're working on their behalf. The disadvantaged communities are totally excluded. So I would just say, keep your eyes open about that. And I don't know what, branch or, what you want to do with your degree. But of course, the Greens needs, people that are well-trained, scientific to help us deal with these policy issues. So I hope you can help us with that. So, while you're in school, make some time to be in one of these activist groups, hopefully a Green Party local, whatever you can find. Emil Sachs. Howie, with the news talking about the Dem machine literally bankrolling GOP candidates, even MAGAs, that's true, with a national chapter discuss that. My mind is blown that it's even legal and no one asks why. The national chapter of, I'm not sure who you're referring to there, but yeah, I mean, this is the game that Clinton played by, telling the media to promote Trump because he'd be the easiest candidate to beat. And then she got beat by him, not in the popular vote, but the electoral vote. The Democrats, really just should pay attention to the Democrats. Here they are promoting far-right Republicans, and on the other hand, trying to keep the Green Party off the ballot, telling us we're stealing their votes. They don't own our votes. Our votes are our votes. So, yeah, it's disgusting. And this may come back to bite them again because you don't, this is kind of in a way, the Democrats were very critical of, who's that actress that said, if Trump gets elected, we'll have a revolution? Susan Sarandon.
Oh.
I thought that was a terrible idea because you don't put the right in power. And the Democrats are basically having the same theory. You get the worst Republican running and then we can win. Well, you might not win, and then you put the right in power. You don't play games like that. You advocate your own position, and you criticize positions like that. You don't behind the scene with dark money and PAC money support these extreme right-wing candidates. But that's what they're doing. And meanwhile, they're attacking the progressives inside the Democratic Party. They're going after Ilhan Omar, AOC, in particular, and Rashida Tlaib. And, I'd like to see those people in the Green Party, but the establishment Democratic Party is attacking them. Or you had the race down in Texas. Henry Cisneros, who, is pro life, anti-abortion, against Jessica Cisneros, I believe her name was, who is a progressive, and the Democratic establishment supported Cisneros. And then I read this week, Cisneros came out in support or in not raising the federal minimum wage. He said $7.25 an hour is enough. That's your Democratic Party. Michael Shin, thoughts on Rise Up for Abortion Rights Revolutionary Communist Party. They've been shunned by pro-choice groups on Twitter. Local Rise Up for Abortion Rights is very active, and I haven't seen anything alarming from them and built some rapport with them. Yeah, I think that's kind of a sectarian inter-movement squabbling with the established pro-choice groups, seeing Rise Up as kind of an upstart. Now, I have a lot of problems with the politics of the Revolutionary Communist Party, so-called Revolutionary Party that endorsed Biden. But leaving that aside, when you have single-issue coalitions, you want the broadest united front you can have. So they are not in Syracuse, where I live. They are in New York City. I run into them when I'm down there at demonstrations. And, they have their little cadre. And I think they should be part of the movement when we have common demands. So I think, work with them as a Green Party person on those issues, while agreeing to disagree on things like working class political independence. It blows my mind. They're supposed to be super revolutionary, and here they are, supporting Biden back in 2020 and trashing the Greens. But, they have a right to their opinion. And if we can work together fighting for abortion rights, I'm fine with that. Peggy Coteen, thanks for all you do, Howie. Additionally, like most of all the local and state governments, they don't even mention all the CO2 and methane that comes from animal agriculture. One of the good things Mayor Adams of New York City has done is mandate school lunches have vegan meals on Friday. This will help reduce climate disaster and human health. Can you address some of the multitude of issues of how animal agriculture affects climate disaster? Well, the biggest problem there is factory farms. And, that's huge contribution to carbon emissions, methane emissions, because you got all that dung and waste that has to be, well, it's concentrated in one place. They have these concentrated feed operations and huge pools of sewage. So that adds a lot to the greenhouse gas emissions. Now, some organic farmers will argue that you want animals as part of the ecological balance on a farm ecosystem. And I think there are good arguments for that. So I'm not for banning or urging people to completely eat meat, stop eating meat unless they want to, but to make it a much smaller part of our diets. It'll be a lot healthier for people. And I'm looking up, there was some stuff in this Manchin bill for agriculture. And let me find what it was. I skipped over that in my notes. And it's taken me too long to find it. But there was something like $20 billion to help farmers reduce. $20 billion to help farmers reduce emissions. So I'm not sure what that entails. I'm sure, and if you look at the Eco-Socialist Green New Deal budget we did, where we talked about decarbonizing agriculture, we had a lot more investment in that. I can't remember what we had off the top of my head. But, that's an important part of the solution. Agriculture, among the greenhouse gas emitting sectors, the biggest sector in the country is transportation, followed closely by power production, electricity, although it varies from state to state. Then comes buildings, keeping them heating and cooled, and using gas for cooking and so forth. And then comes manufacturing, and fifth is agriculture. It's about 10% of our greenhouse gas emissions. 9 or 11, I can't remember the number. It's not the biggest sector, but it's an important sector. Plus, the climate is attacking agriculture. Wetlands that, were rice baskets are going to be flooded by rising seas. Areas that were, bread baskets for grains are going to be drought stricken, or the heat is going to be too high. I mean, agriculture is under stress from climate change, which means food production. And of course, with species extinctions, the simplification of ecosystems and their collapse, that means that's the foundation of agriculture. So we're really in a crisis situation. So we need to be talking about agroecology, how to integrate our farms and ranches into the regional ecology in a sustainable basis. And that's going to require, reorientation of ag schools. It's going to require subsidizing farmers so they can make a living income while making the transition to organic agriculture. And, farmers are generally seen as conservative people, but I know I've talked to a lot of them. I talk to them in farmers markets. I'm talking to them on their farms. And they don't like working with pesticides. They know they can get sick, but they feel they have no alternative. So the government's got to support them in making the transition. And also, the estimates are to go to 100% organic agriculture in this country. It's going to be more labor intensive, smaller farms. We need about 1 million new farmers. And you know where they are? They're immigrants from Mexico and Central America. Those people want to farm here. That's their American dream. So they're here. We just got to find a way to help them on the land and support them in becoming organic agriculturalists. Because, and I know this is true in upstate New York, a lot of the farmers' kids don't want to go into farming. So I know the Mexican and Central American farm workers, their dream is to buy out the people they're working for and run them as cooperative farms. So there's a lot of potential there. Agriculture is like the foundation of civilization. And if we're not careful, we're going to lose it. So there's a lot to say there. And animal agriculture is an important part of that discussion. Ballot at Content Boutique. Howie, Richard Wolff, and Robert Reich are promoting inflation solutions that involve a windfall profits tax and a wage and price freeze. But they're still get our ripped off cash. And I think we need to raise the minimum wage. But they still get our ripped off cash. I'm not sure what you mean by that, Violet, but yeah, I've listened to Richard and Robert Rice, and I think they got the basic picture. This is not a wage price spiral. This is supply disruptions, which makes supply scarce, and then the prices go up. It's monopolies that are using inflation as a cover to jack up prices and jack up their profits. So there is an argument for wage and price freezes or regulation, and an excess profits tax. I mean, I just went into the chip manufacturers and how much they made. I didn't go into oil and gas when I was presenting that about the Manchin bill, but they've made for the last 50 years $2.8 billion a day on average. $2.8 billion a day. And now we're subsidizing them even more. I mean, what the hell are we doing? What we're doing is paying the paymasters, the people that pay for campaign contributions. That's what's going on. So, yeah, excess profits tax. You know, I would go further. I would say we should take over the oil and gas industry. I mean, most countries in the world have already done that, whether they're progressive or conservative. You know, Saudi Arabia, Iran, they own their own, nationalized oil companies, along with countries like Norway. So, we should do that. And then we can take the earnings from the sales of oil and gas that's already in the pipeline and reinvest it in renewables instead of in more oil and gas exploration, which this damn Manchin bill subsidizes. And in fact, mandates. If you want to build renewables on public lands or the oceans, you first got to auction off that stuff to the private oil and gas companies. It's, how self-respecting environmentalists can stand for that and say the bill's in advance is beyond me. The point now is to stop the destruction, not take a little, token money for renewables. We've had little things like this since the Carter administration. There were tax credits for insulation, solar panels, wind generators. I worked in a worker co-op that worked in that market till Reagan got rid of it in the early 80s. And all was left was the community action program insulation, which wasn't a lot of fun. It was more fun to build solar panels and do energy audits and even repair wind generators like on the coast where the salt water would get in there, and you take them down, break them down like an engine, clean them all up, oil them all up, and then hoist it back up. Those were fun jobs. So we've had this for a long time, and to just like say, well, we're getting something, so we'll accept, massive oil and gas, new infrastructure that'll be there for decades, heating up the planet is just doesn't make any sense to me. Michael Shin, what is your response to the claim that if we raise taxes on the rich and corporations will move to another state or country, take their business and capital and jobs with them? Yeah, they always say that, but a couple things to say about that is first, and this is why we're eco-socialism, if we owned our own jobs through cooperatives and public enterprises, we wouldn't move them overseas. We wouldn't move our own jobs overseas. Come on. Second thing is it's overblown. I mean, there have been lots of studies. They raise taxes in New Jersey. They have the highest tax bracket for state income taxes. I guess in the East Coast, California has a higher bracket. And when they raised it, everybody said, oh, they're going to move across the river to Pennsylvania. I mean, Jersey was something like top bracket was 11 or 13%, and Pennsylvania was 4%. People didn't move to Pennsylvania. They were making their money in New Jersey. Their friends and family and homes were in New Jersey. Very few people moved. The highly publicized cases were assholes like Rush Limbaugh and, sports celebrities that avoid tax obligations. They make a lot of money in a few years. So they, establish residence in Florida or something. But, like I'm in New York, there's a lot of money to be made in New York City. And you got a city income tax as well as a state income tax. And a whole lot of other taxes. If they left New York, they wouldn't make that money. So that's mostly a canard. And there are academic studies that back up what I'm saying, although I can't cite them off the top of my head now, but it's been going on for years. The argument's been going on forever. So what we've had is a race to the bottom. And cities and counties and states are all lowering their taxes in competition with other states. And we have case studies where a company will decide we're going to, in fact, we had this in Syracuse. They decided they're coming to Syracuse, but they started talking to Scranton, I think Youngstown, Ohio, and got them said, look, we need a tax break to come here. And then they would tell Syracuse, Youngstown, and Scranton are offering these tax breaks. You got to give us a better deal. And Syracuse did. And then it comes out, it gets revealed later that they were coming to Syracuse anyway. They basically blackmailed us. They hustled us. And we've been hustled by this, this rich people blackmail for too long. And we just got to stop. What we do need at the federal level is, federal standards, federal progressive taxes. We should have our schools funded by federal income tax rather than local property tax, so we could have equitable funding. That would take part of this tax jurisdiction competition off the table. There's a lot of things we could do. The worst thing we could do is succumb to blackmail by the rich. ROGB. People's Party has a petition to trade Assange for Griner. I hold my Green Party signs on too. Biden would rather free an arms dealer and keep U.S. cannabis users in jail and kill Julian, of course. Trade Assange for what? You send Assange to Russia in return for Griner? I haven't thought about that one. Last I heard is Russia was asking Germany to send a murderer back to Russia. And of course, Germany wasn't in the deal about these American prisoners. So a lot of people see that as basically a way to buy time until Griner gets sentenced, and then they'll actually talk seriously. No, I don't know. Assange should be freed. Biden should drop the prosecution. Keep Griner out of it. Just free Assange. That should be our demand. I mean, I don't know what this deal, why are you trying to tell Biden to cut a deal, Griner for Assange? I don't know what the Russians think about that. No, we should keep demanding Assange just be freed, period. So I don't have the question up, so I don't see if I got to all parts of it. But my first reaction is I don't like that. I think it just confuses the demand on Assange. Assange is in prison for taking information that was leaked and making it public. That's, if that becomes illegal, we're never going to know what the government does, because every day the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal write stories based on leaked information. And if they can put, Julian Assange away for this, when they want to, they'll go after the Times and the Post and the Wall Street Journal and any other journalist. And that's what Nixon tried to do when the New York Times started printing the Pentagon Papers. So this is no idle speculation. Okay, cannabis users should be freed, no doubt. And the arms dealer, look, the arms dealer, if they can trade the arms dealer for Griner and that other, I think he's a Marine that's been held on accusations of espionage, which seem pretty dubious. I'm for that. Let Russia deal with his arms dealer. I read a little bit. I mean, he was selling arms to everybody. He's a mercenary. He's not pro-Russian or pro-American. He's pro-money. But so that's my thoughts on that question. Frankie Lee, Howie, how do we stop the practice of hiring fascists to be cops and return to community-based policing? Jubilant and I were just talking about that walking down here about the police in Harrisburg and Syracuse and the sheriff's departments. I don't know, return to community-based policing? Were we ever there? Except in a few unique places. We got to get somebody beside the Democrats who run most of the cities in office. I mean, the police are powerful because they're in bed with the real estate industry, which makes money off of segregation by class and race. So, as they gentrify a neighborhood, they push the poor people out. And when they move the poor people of color to a neighborhood that, maybe working class neighborhood that's white, and then they tell the white people your property values are going down and the crime's going up, so you got to leave. So they flee, they sell their houses cheap. Real estate buys it up cheap, then it sells it high to the people of color moving into the neighborhood. And then those white people move to the suburbs and they get sold high. So they're making money each way. And the role of the police in most cities is to keep the poor people of color, primarily, working class people generally, out of the upscale neighborhoods to protect their quote unquote property values. So that's why these lower income people of color communities are over policed. And there's stuff going on in the upscale neighborhoods, particularly drug use, that they don't worry about. So that, and the Democrats, they're financed by this real estate industry. That's been the game. It's got worse since the 20s. I mean, steadily worse. We're more segregated than we were in the 1920s, when the country was probably at its peak of, ideological racism. So we just needed new people in power in our cities that will take on the real estate industry and insist that we have citizen review boards with real power to, basically, we need community control of the police. And that was a big issue in the campaign in 2020. We need to require that the police live in the communities instead of, basically being an outside occupying force. But you're not going to get that from the Democrats, because who finances their communities, their elections is the real estate industry. And in those areas, generally smaller towns in rural America, it's the Republicans. Same game. Real estate rules the roost in municipal politics, and that's what we got to break up. And so, the way we stop that practice is we gotta elect new people into the power structure in our cities. Michael Shin, Howie, do you know to what extent neo-Nazis are deliberately entering the police and the military in anticipation from some coup or civil war? I've read talk of it, but how much of it is real? It's real enough that the military itself is concerned. Police are more, I think, open to these fascists coming into their forces, and sheriff's departments. And so, it depends on the place. I mean, Los Angeles, a little bit about that. They basically have gangs within the police department and the sheriff's department in particular. And they're entrenched, and they've been there forever. So the question was dropped. To what extent? Well, we know from research by people that study this. There's that Southern Poverty Law Center group in, I think, in Mississippi or Alabama. There's there are researchers, academic researchers that study this, and yeah, that's what the right wing talks about to themselves. Get in the military, get trained, get ready for the coming race war. So they're in there now. The military is doing a somewhat serious job of trying to get some of these people out. And I think it depends on, who your, chain of command is and how serious they are about it. I can tell you, when I went in the Marine Corps boot camp in early 70s, the people in my training battalion were from South Boston and East Boston, who had just violently resisted desegregation in Boston. East St. Louis, one of the poorest black ghettos in the country, and some Appalachian kids and a few Ivy League kids. And the South Boston and East Boston guys were troubled. They had racial trouble. They got booted out. I mean, they basically got one warning. If they persisted in any kind of racial attitudes, they threw them out. I was kind of impressed by that because, for the military, you got to depend on each other for survival. You don't want to be divided by race when you're in a foxhole together. So there's a real practical reason there. So I think in the military, my guess is they're doing a better job. And I've read something about that. But our law enforcement, that seems to be where the the fascists like to go. You look at occupational interest surveys, tell you what occupations you got to go into. The right wingers tend to want to go, they have the same values as the police we got. I think that's where the bigger problem is. And I'm not sure who's investigating that, Homeland Security or FBI, I don't know. But one thing I do know is the biggest terrorist threat in this country are domestic white supremacist terrorists. And so the federal government is putting more attention to that, but I still think probably not enough than they used to. I mean, they're spending a lot of time worried about Muslims who are hardly doing anything anymore, while these white supremacists are shooting up, black churches, synagogues, Latinos shopping in a mall. That's where the death and destruction has been directed, and where it's came from. So that's where the security, federal security should be focused. And I'm afraid, I think some of it's in the police departments. They have to be investigated as well. JD, why don't you promise a guaranteed free place for anyone who can't afford it if they vote for you, along with free health care and college? You get all non-voters to vote. A no-brainer. Well, yeah, a guaranteed free place. That means affordable housing for all. I mean, basically, that's our platform. Parts of it. We want to expand public housing to the point where everybody has an affordable option. We want universal public health care, community-based national health service free at the point of delivery. And what was the other thing on there? You need to leave the questions up so I can remember. And college. Yeah, public colleges should be tuition free. In fact, we should do like the GI Bill did for guys coming back from World War II. They got a stipend, enough to support families, because a lot of these people had families. And, that was a good investment. The Joint Economic Committee of Congress had some economists look at it. For every dollar invested in the GI Bill, it brought back $7 in return. It was a good investment. So yeah, it should all be a no-brainer. And and this doesn't even require socialism. It just requires a welfare state, if you want to call it that provides some basic things like education, healthcare, and housing. And most Western European countries provide this. So it's not something that can't be done or is exotic or too radical. That's something Bernie Sanders keeps pointing out. He's not really a radical. He's a New Dealer. So this is something we could do. And of course, we campaign on it. And the problem with the non-voters is, they may like what you say, but do they believe you can deliver or will deliver? That's where the trust has to be built. That's where the grassroots organizing has to happen. So people see us in their communities, active on these issues all the time, not just at elections. So when elections come around, they say, we know who the Greens are. They're out here with the people, and we trust them because they've been fighting. It takes more than just having a good platform. It requires a movement, and we need to organize that.
What do you have to drink?
What do I think of Jason Kander's book? You got to tell me more. I don't know the book.
Oh, in town, yes. Let's look over. Otherwise, so we have
So there's not another question up. So I guess that means we're at the end here. And last week I said we got to get off of the screens and onto the streets. So that's what I'm doing this weekend. I'm going back out here in Harrisburg today. I'll be in Philadelphia tomorrow. And, we got to get our people on the ballot, not let the Democrats do all their dirty tricks to keep us off the ballot, and basically leave us out of the discussion. Because, getting into the debate is half the battle. We can win those debates. Like the last question about tuition-free public college and healthcare free at the point of delivery, and affordable housing option for everybody. we can win those debates. The majority of people are for those things. But if we're not on the ballot and in the debates, it's like we're just, like writing op-eds and handing out leaflets, but it's not the same. That's why elections are where you can bring issues and constituencies together. And that's why it's so important to, keep fighting, even though the Democrats, as we saw with Matthew Ho in North Carolina, we saw with the new election law in New York, as we saw with our presidential campaign in Pennsylvania, where I'm at now, Wisconsin, Montana, all the dirty tricks pulling on them in North Carolina, they used against us in 2020 and been doing it for decades, going back to Ralph Nader. That was probably the biggest campaign led by the same guy, Mark Elias, who is the Democrats' top election lawyer. He ran the election division of Perkins Coie, the big Democratic law firm. Now he's broken it off into the Elias Law Group, which that's what they focus on. And he gets a lot of credit for, defeating Trump in court on his bogus election fraud claims, which really wasn't that hard. And he is in court fighting some of the Republicans' voter suppression and election theft laws. So on the other side, the dark side, he's been attacking the Green Party, access to the ballot for decades. So I don't know, this guy's not really for democracy, he's just for Democrats. And that's the kind of mentality we're up against. So hope everybody, keeps fighting. If you're in Massachusetts, they're finishing their petition this weekend. Pennsylvania this weekend. Connecticut's petition is later in August. I'm gonna go out in Connecticut next month and help Michael Andrade, what was his name? I had him on the podcast. I can't remember his last name. It's a Nigerian name. Koriade, something like that. Anyway.
Oratade.
Koratade, thank you. Koratade. Gonna go help him petition in Connecticut. So I hope everybody, to the extent you can, will also do that kind of thing. And, here's another Green petitioner who's helping out. We appreciate Jubilin helping us out today. And she's been a candidate. I hope she's a candidate in the future. And so let's go to work for another week, and we'll have another conversation next week. So have a good week.